and recording. We are continue in our reading of an article from Moment Magazine called Ask the Rabbis, and the question that they are addressing is, the question is empathy a Jewish value? And I'm going to pop it up on the screen. We just have the various forms of orthodoxy left. And then I found a little material from Sefaria, which is kind of interesting if we have time. Okay, so Joanne, would you like to start reading Modern Orthodox?
Empathy is a central Jewish value. Maimonides makes clear that acts of loving kindness, such as visiting the sick, comforting mourners, or offering hospitality, are all fulfillments of the central Jewish mitzvah to love your neighbor as yourself. All these practices require empathy for the other person. Maimonides considers not sharing the community's concerns, not rejoicing in its victories, not feeling its pain, to be an ultimate betrayal of membership in the Jewish people.
Right.
Lately, some have pointed out that empathy without boundaries can be destructive. Witness those whose empathy for Palestinians striving for a state of their own, or for Palestinians suffering in Gaza or the West Bank, leads them to support Hamas and other terrorist groups that have murdered, raped, or kidnapped Israelis and Jews. This is living proof that all good values and ideas have limits. They become destructive when taken too far. In Jews who turn anti-Zionist, empathy for strangers, Palestinians obliterates the natural human emotion to protect and consider the suffering of one's family first. Supporting those who would kill the Jewish people, they betray their responsibility for fellow Jews. As the Talmud says, those who show compassion for those who are cruel end up showing cruelty to those who deserve compassion.
Many of us are familiar with Yitz Greenberg, who in his 90s is still writing books. Just an amazing guy. Just one thing that's worth pointing out is that Jewish law goes further than addressing what you're not supposed to do. So in this little paragraph, interesting quote from Maimonides, and that is, not sharing the community's concerns is a betrayal of membership in the Jewish people. So it's more than just the thou shalt nots, but there is a lot of affirmative commandments that are part of Jewish tradition as well. Okay, Joanne, how would you like to continue reading? You do such a nice job of that.
It
Okay.
is critically important. Empathy is the beginning of compassion. You can't have compassion unless you have an empathetic understanding of some other person, and compassion is considered one of the most vital characteristics of a Jewish soul. The Talmud relates that the Israelites during a famine received a divine communication that they were being punished for two sins: not properly mourning King Saul after his death and neglecting a community called the Gevanim, whose status as Jews was uncertain and who had been harmed by Saul's wars. King David offered the Gevanim compensation, but they insisted on blood revenge on Saul's sons. David granted it, but declared that thenceforth they were not to be treated as Jews. The Talmud draws from this story that Jews in community must demonstrate three qualities. They must be compassionate, have a sense of shame, and do chesed, deeds of loving kindness to one another. Someone who does not have these three characteristics is suspected of not being fully Jewish. This view was incorporated in parts of Jewish law, a reflection of what the sages considered the essence of the Jewish soul. That said, our compassion has to have limits. The Lurianic Kabbalah teaches that din justice starts from the idea that God's chesed could be so overpowering that God had to create vessels such as din to hold it. We have to be careful never to dull our empathy, but what we do with it requires more thought. To those who criticize suicidal empathy, I would say it's not the empathy that's harmful, it's applying it in the wrong circumstances. For instance, concluding that no, we can't have open borders, so we can't keep the borders open to all those fleeing persecution or seeking a better life for their families, doesn't preclude feeling empathy for those who are hurt. The policy isn't a Jewish response. The Jewish part of the response would be to feel the empathy.
Paul?
Yes, I'm just wondering, in the back of my mind, I'm wondering if rabbis stick to these kind of rules also. I mean, would a rabbi be more Jewish if he reflected on what the sages considered to be empathetic behavior?
So I think what you're really asking is would a rabbi be more observant of Jewish law?
That's right, yes.
I think that depends what movement that rabbi's part of. I am not a terribly observant Jew. I don't strictly keep the Sabbath. I like to think that as a Reformed Jew, I do focus on moral and ethical laws, which this is talking about.
That's what I'm after, yes.
But the there's a very interesting issue about whether a rabbi has a responsibility to be an exemplar.
That's right.
So,
yes. Yes.
right. And that's something I have very much struggled with.
Yeah.
Particularly, as it affects my day-to-day life, my wife's day-to-day life. I can remember Rabbi Greenbaum, actually his wife, mentioning to someone that when she would go shopping, this was a former rabbi at Temple Adat Elohim. Ellen knows him well. His wife would say when she would go shopping, congregants would come over and start looking through her basket to see if they could find any pork or shellfish or I've often reflected that for the most part of my rabbinic career, I haven't lived in the towns where I am the rabbi. So I wouldn't be necessarily running into congregants a lot. That's actually not true now. I actually live in Camarillo and I had a pulpit in Camarillo. But I mean, different rabbis have different roles, and I consider my role to be a teacher, not necessarily to live a deeply observant life. If you want a rabbi who is very observant, I'm not your guy. And now I would say, I think there are stories, certainly in many religions, but even in Judaism, of rabbis, doing terribly unethical things. And I would say we are more than a little shocked, because I think there is an underlying suspicion and expectation that a rabbi should be better behaved
exactly
than the average person.
There you go. Exactly.
I would say it's a reasonable expectation, although the rabbi is not a priest.
Right.
But it's something that I have struggled with since I have become ordained. I will say, Alan.
Well, I actually don't think that. I mean, I find this interesting, but I don't think this is connected to empathy. Whether you look at somebody else and try to judge whether they're.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I thought it was an interesting question, not necessarily.
But I do have a question about how I can appreciate empathy. So I can appreciate it when I'm face to face with a person in his or her situation. But when I read the Bible or any book, not even the Bible, and I'm trying to understand what was going through their minds or what they were experiencing, I'm thinking about can we appreciate the empathy of somebody that's either no longer alive or not in front of you,
Oh, actually, you lost me. I thought you were going in a completely different direction. I thought you were saying, how does the Bible teach us empathy? That's one issue. Then the question is, if the Bible talks about folks that have been dead for a long time, can you empathize with that?
Well, the Bible stories could be case studies where two living people express their behavior toward each other, so then I can see role models, right? But I don't necessarily have the empathy for Abraham when he had to decide whether to take Isaac up the mountain, where I could. I mean, I'm just
Right.
throwing this out as an idea. That's
Right.
all.
I would say there are lots of troubling stories in the Bible which don't seem to teach empathy at all.
Okay.
Um, the story, I mean, I was looking at other sources on empathy from Sepharia, and for example, the book of Ruth has a lot of empathy teaching in it, where Ruth's daughters-in-law follow her and care for her, and she cares for them, and Boaz cares. I mean, there's a lot of empathy going on in the book of Ruth. One lesson, we may read it tonight if we finish really the next section, is, God visits Abraham as he is recovering from his circumcision, and that teaches the mitzvah of visiting the sick. So I would say, now there's a story, between God and Abraham, but clearly, well, maybe not so clearly, but the rabbis certainly have taken that to be an indication of empathy. And then, in other non-religious literature, you have, the story of Romeo and Juliet. I mean, I don't know how you can really take that story seriously without feeling something. And so those are two fictional dead folks, but
I
they
know
still teach a story. Yeah, go ahead.
I know of some hospitals, actually. You crossed my mind recently because I learned that there are hospitals that are giving empathy training
Really?
to
Wow.
the
They're giving
person,
empathy training to whom?
to the personnel.
To their own personnel.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I thought of this and I was just
Yeah.
like, oh, I have to tell them that, you know,
Yeah,
it's
and simply, the commandment, love your neighbor like yourself, um, teaches empathy on a lot of different levels. And that's a commandment that certainly has a major place in Christian thought as well as Jewish thought. I think Jesus is quoted as saying it's the commandment second only to loving God is loving your fellow person. Okay, we have one more section from this article, and it's from Chabad. So let's read Chabad.
Chabad, absolutely, unequivocally. I would call it the quintessential Jewish value pioneered by the first Jew, Abraham, who trailblazed a new path in life. In a pagan world driven by a dog eats dog attitude, Abraham instituted a revolutionary new approach which would change the course of history. That we're here to love each other and perpetuate virtue and justice. As Rabbi Akiva said, the most cardinal of all mitzvot is to love your fellow human as yourself. That is the fundamental principle of all of life. It's the essence of all Judaism and of all civilization. However, empathy is not about making yourself feel good because you helped somebody. We have to be very careful not to fall into the trap of selfish empathy, which just serves our own needs, or suicidal empathy, appeasing an enemy, which ends up harming oneself. Such empathy often turns not to be empathetic at all. We are taught those who are kind to the cruel will end up being cruel to the kind. Appeasement, empathy in the face of an enemy, in the face of hurting people who are innocent, is not empathy at all. So you have to always ask yourself, are you being empathetic because it makes you feel better or because you're answering to a higher truth, a higher order? The essence of empathy is that life is not all about you. You're not the center of the universe. You're here to give, to share, to serve, to transcend. Empathy, like love, is about transcendence. It's what allows human beings of different natures and personalities and opinions to transcend their differences and unite in harmony as one.
And I think, to some degree, we're seeing there that any good idea can be carried to the wrong extreme, and this this phrase that we see a lot is those who are kind to the cruel will end up being cruel to the kind. And that
What's that
we've seen that
mean?
quoted a couple. Well,
I don't know.
I mean, I think their question is, what does that mean?
Yes,
So if you have someone who is cruel, who is a horrible person, let's say I don't know, someone who is a murderer, someone who abuses people, children, spouses, others.
okay,
You can say, well, our attitude ought to be to love them and be kind to them, to understand them, and so on. And I would say there is some element of truth in that, but but if we sort of discharge and do away with our sense of judgment about what's right and wrong, that will undermine society. I think that's what that's saying. And the example that a couple of people referred to in this article, and this is a current article from Moment Magazine, is, I mean, I would say it's impossible not to feel some empathy to, the people who basically have been bombed out of their homes in Hamas, in Gaza, sorry. And the same thing in southern Lebanon and in Iran. And the question is, if that leads us to say, well, we'll stop supporting Israel and we'll deny Israel the weapons to defend itself, then we become cruel to the kind. So there's a limit on it. That's the way I read that.
yeah.
Jerry?
I agree with that sentence, except it's very surprising to me that it comes from Chabad, because they're the group that very often will go to the prisons and speak to the horrible people and extend their empathy to those who don't even deserve a.
Okay, so you're assuming if you're in prison, you're horrible and you don't deserve any empathy.
Well, not quite, but I've known them to be kind to some
Oh, no,
horrible.
that Chabad goes and visits, and I've gone to prisons and visited people in prisons as well.
Yes.
So yeah,
Horrible.
so I would go ahead, finish.
I'm saying horrible people. I'm talking the worst. I'm not necessarily, I'm rapists, abusers.
Right.
You know, I just, especially when they've been in that situation over and over again and been let out of prison and do the same thing, and they're back in there, and Chabad is, being
Yeah, so I mean,
kind.
you raise, I would say, an important issue, and that is the nature of what you do as a result of empathy. So I would say, if as a result of empathy, you are active in getting people released or even hiding people from the law, there I would agree with you. But on the other hand, if someone is sort of safely behind bars by visiting them and encouraging positive influences in their lives, you may not get anywhere. But there are people that go to prison and they have done horrible things, and they have had either personal, ethical insights. I'm going to stop sharing so everybody can see each other. Either they've had personal, wonderful turnarounds, or they've got religious. I know many Jews who are upset with the idea that someone in prison can find Jesus and turn their life around, and they have the expectation that they will be just fine. And my own reaction to that is, I don't worry about the theology of that. But if they really have turned their life around and they, and once they get out, if they start visiting kids and keeping them from going into prison, Judaism absolutely recognizes the idea of teshuvah, and that people can change. So it is a balance, but I would say, the balancing line is what you're doing harmful to society. I would say visiting people in prison and encouraging them is not harmful to society. I may,
No, but you're extending kindness to
yes,
cruel people. And I've seen some that have been let out to do the horrible things that they did the first time.
right. So
It's crowded.
right. So
You let them out, they do it again.
right. So there, I'm trying to think of concrete examples. So if you're in a parole hearing and the parole board is swayed by a feeling of empathy toward the perpetrator, I would have an issue with that as well. There ought to be a heavy dose of justice along with compassion.
Okay.
And also a need to protect people.
Yes, absolutely.
But yeah, I mean, that's come up now with who are the brothers that killed their parents?
Yeah.
Menendez
Menendez.
brothers. I mean, they've spent most of their lives in prison.
Yeah.
And that's interesting question to what degree do we feel empathy for them, and to what degree does that empathy influence, let's say, the governor of California to commute their sentences? That's a very interesting question. Alan.
I like to think of, maybe I'm not disagreeing with you, Jerry, but maybe I am, that when clergy people or people of faith visit prisoners, they're just being friends. They're reminding them that they're part of their is that they're human. And I'm going to suggest, I'm not a rabbi and I've never visited a prisoner, but I'm going to suggest that the discussion isn't about the crime and the release of the prison. It's about the person having empathy that the clergy person expresses, and is a good role model in an extreme of a criminal that could be a role model for any other person to be a friend.
In many cases, I get called to prisons because a prisoner wants to go on a diet of kosher food because they have some idea that food is going to be better than the other. And it turns out in Ventura County, you don't need a rabbi to certify the person should be on kosher food. If someone just requests it, they can get kosher food.
Like being on an airplane.
But I've also had, cases where people have done horrible things. Sometimes these are Jewish people. Sometimes they are interested in Judaism, and they're wondering, would they be welcome in a synagogue? Can they explore Judaism? How can they turn their life around? So I would say I'm there to do counseling. And I would say as part of my counseling, I begin from a place of empathy.
I hope you also begin with a sense of protection for the congregants, that they're not being put in harm's way by that person being there.
Protection from who? I'm sorry.
From the evildoer, or the
protection of whom? Person of me?
The prisoner who's been let out.
Yeah, I've never gotten involved with any discussion of letting out a prisoner.
No. Okay.
Lois, and then Joanne.
I was just going to say that something I came away with last week, I think from something you said, Paul, was there's a difference between empathy, which is a feeling, and acting on it.
Yes.
So, right. So there's a difference between having empathy, say, for instance, a prisoner, and letting them out of jail. I mean, so that's, I thought, was an important way for me to think about it.
Yeah, I mean, the critical issue is when you're in a position to actually do something. So, as an example, a a governor or a president who can commute sentences or pardon. That's very different than just someone visiting. And I would be contacted and try and get copies of the Bible for people, or just counseling people. Um, you know, yeah, no one has, and by the way, I've always visited through bulletproof glass and a telephone, like you see in the movies. I've never been in a position where I'm making what they call contact visits, and I don't want to be in that position.
Blame you.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard stories from fellow rabbis who have had real problems. Uh, anyway, Joanne.
So I've never visited anyone in prison, but just listening to all of this conversation, I'm just thinking you can show empathy, but keep a boundary is what I'm thinking. Okay, because it's a very, very difficult area to address, right? Somebody obviously committed a very serious crime, but they're still a human being, so you might want to show a little bit of empathy, but not too much. It's like you don't want to feed into the situation and almost validate what they did,
Right.
was
Yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
the interesting thing not in Judaism, but in Christianity, is the idea that by accepting Jesus, you will be forgiven of your sins. And I would say, I don't have I mean, clearly I don't endorse that as theology. I don't have a big problem with it as long as it doesn't lead to people being then released into the general public. Um, yeah. Paul, do you want to add something else?
Yeah, I just want to add one thing. I don't know where the quote was in the line of text there, but I'll just try to do my best. I was once going down Temple Avenue, Temple, let's see, from Las Posas to Temple to Ponderosa, and I saw a shopping cart on the sidewalk. And I said to myself, my Uncle Marvin is with me in the car. And I said, Uncle Marvin, I need to stop for just a minute. And he says, what for? I said, because you see that shopping cart on the sidewalk? It can roll off and hit somebody's car and they can have an accident, a bad one. So I run around the block. I stop my car and I push the shopping cart into a place where the wheels would catch it and they wouldn't fall, wouldn't roll anymore. I said, Uncle Marvin, that's like being what Jewish is about.
That's what is all about?
Like Jewish is about. You have empathy for other people. You have an idea of what can happen to other people, and you make it so that it won't happen to them.
Yeah, but I would not certainly I wouldn't limit that to Judaism.
Right. Okay.
Right. And it's basically, pikuach nefesh is trying to avoid harm coming to people.
Right. Right.
Okay. I think what I'm going to do is jump to, we have some time left, and I'm going to show you something that you may not be familiar with. I would say many of us are familiar with Sefaria in terms of just, exploring texts. But a lot of times if you, like I think I Googled Jewish empathy and they referred me to Sefaria, and Sefaria has this, a lot of study sheets and things. It's just an amazing resource. And so this is items on empathy. And so, his notable sources, I didn't even look at all sources. But anyway, in notable sources, some of these I looked at and, well, for example, we've looked at this in the Tanakh, so I wasn't going to. Some of them I found interesting. Oh, they reset all of them. Oh, let me see one second. Just go back. Yes. Okay. So let's see. Yeah. Because I opened a few that I thought were interesting. Okay. That's not going to work, but I think I remember. So there's, that's the commandment, Moses' grief. compassion in Jewish civil
A
law.
civil one. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so this is kind of interesting. Jewish civil law integrates compassion with justice, emphasizing the obligation to relate to others with compassion and generosity as a normative halacha, as a normative element of Jewish law. The principle Kol Yisrael Averim Zeh B'Zeh, all of Israel, meaning the people Israel, are responsible for one another, underscores the communal bond and collective responsibility among Jews. And so this is from the Talmud. A basic element in Jewish law is the integration of compassion with justice. To a large extent, the halacha goes beyond the requirement of justice. The obligation to relate to others with compassion and generosity is not merely a supererogatory, is a word, addition to one's legal obligations. It is normative halacha that is derived from the conception of the Jewish people as one family. This is the reason for the distinction that one finds between general halachot that structure economic life, which apply to all. And I guess if we wanted, we could continue reading this. One of the things that this reminded me of, and I think I've commented on it, is that a difference between Jewish law and civil law is one element of Jewish law is the rabbi who is part of a Jewish court is not only representing Jewish law, but also representing God, including God's element of compassion. And the example I remember learning is the issue of suppose someone is a mamzer. What is a mamzer? A mamzer is someone who is born out of an illegal sexual union. It's sometimes called bastard, but in English terminology, a bastard is someone who is born out of wedlock. But if two people get together, I'm just going to say two Jews, won't get into the issue of which one is Jewish, but if two Jews get together, they are not married to each other, but they're not married to anybody else. They have sex and they have a child. That child's legal status is not any different than any other Jewish child, even though their parents were not married. But if two people commit adultery, that child is considered a mamzer. And under Orthodox Jewish law, that child cannot marry a regular Jew. They can only marry other mamzerim. And of course, if they were to marry outside the faith, outside of Judaism, that would not be an issue for a Jewish court because it would not be considered a marriage at all. And it was actually, I think this was in a thing on television, which was like the Beauty Queen of Jerusalem or something. I can't remember the name of it. It was on Netflix, I think. And they actually came to this case where couple wanted to get married. So imagine the situation. Couple wants to get married and they come to a rabbi and they say, Rabbi, we want to get married, but I know that I'm a mamzer and I can't marry the love of my life. So the
that wasn't the Beauty Queen of
that exact situation came up in that series, which by the way is a wonderful series. I think it's Netflix, but I'm not sure. I don't know if it's still on.
I read the book.
Oh, okay. But if someone were to come before a rabbi, if the rabbi was acting like a civil judge, the issue would be determining whether or not there was adultery or not. And if there was adultery, yes, you're a mamzer, end of discussion, no marriage. But what I think happens in that story, and also what I learned in my Jewish law course, is the rabbi might instead turn to the person who says he's a mamzer, and he says, are you sure you're Jewish? And the guy would say, of course I'm Jewish. How could I not be Jewish? So the rabbi would say, is your mother Jewish? He said, are you kidding? My mother is the most Jewish person you ever met. What about your grandmother? He says, my bubby? Of course she's Jewish. Well, what about her mother? Well, I never met her mother, but, my bubby used to, okay, what about her great-grandmother on the mother's side? And the person would say, How can I possibly know? I can know a few generations, but I can't know 5, 6, 7 generations in the past. And so the rabbi might say, aha, there is a safek, there is a doubt as to whether or not you're really Jewish. So I am going to rule that because of this doubt, you need to go through a conversion.
Oh, wow.
So that afternoon, they draw a drop of blood from where his foreskin used to be. They take him to the mikvah, they dunk him in the mikvah, and now he's Jewish. But since, of course, he wasn't Jewish before, according to this rabbi, he can't be a mamzer. So therefore, they can get married.
Oh, wow.
So that's the rabbi using what I think we would call a legal fiction to get around a problem. And the rabbi was representing God's element of, we could say, empathy or compassion. And what I find is you wouldn't expect a judge in a court to do that, because the role of a judge in a court is to call balls and strikes, is to apply the law in a disinterested way to the facts before him or her. But in a Jewish court, the rabbi is also representing God. Alan.
So I just two things. The mamzer, that's a legitimate way to get out of being a mamzer, is to go through a conversion?
Only if you're not Jewish.
No, but I mean I see. But in the case of the TV series,
Yes.
the girlfriend in Beirut raised the boy as a Jew. I thought the controversy, one part of many controversy in that film, was that the family, the father was Sephardic, and they saw
Sephardic Ashkenazi has nothing to do with it.
No, it shouldn't. But so I had thought that because the boy had lived away from the home in Jerusalem, raised as a Jew, I assumed that the mother was Jewish. But you're saying,
but what about the mother's great 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 grandmother?
No, but well, no, well, that's the part that leads to your point. I get it.
Right.
Get it. Okay.
So the
thanks.
question is, I mean, I think it's not an automatic solution. My understanding is that happened with the Ethiopian Jews. And the issue with the Ethiopian Jews is that they were separated from the rest of the Jewish world before the Talmud. Okay?
Right.
So now there is divorce mentioned in the Bible, but according to Orthodoxy, in order to have a divorce, you have to have a get, and the language of the get is specified in the Talmud. But because the Ethiopian Jews were never part of a community that studied Talmud, one can only presume that if you go back 2,000 years, there must have been divorces and there weren't gets. So my understanding, I really should check this before I talk about it so much, but my understanding is that the rabbis in Israel ruled that all Ethiopian Jews were suspected mamzers, and therefore you couldn't have black Jews marrying white Jews in Israel. And the solution would be that we doubt whether they are really Jewish, so we do what I just mentioned. It's not that they have to go through a year of study or whatever, but they were just doing mass conversions. And so then, black Jews marrying white Jews, no issue. So it's a question of, as you pursue Jewish law, do you pursue it strictly according to law, or do you include the idea of empathy in your decision making?
If somebody converts and then commits adultery, since you know that they were Jewish, regardless of whether their ancestors were, because they converted,
yes,
you then do not have this workaround available to you.
Okay, that's actually a very good point. So that would actually answer Alan's question. You're right. If someone, now there's presumably another partner, so we can pursue that one. But if the only issue is whether the mother is Jewish, so if the mother converted and then has a child, there is no issue about whether that child is a mamzer. And of course, in the conservative world, and certainly in the reform world, they have just stopped recognizing that part of Jewish law. And now with computers and things, it really becomes a problem because it's easier to keep track of who is a mamzer. Jerry.
Yeah, this is just a few of which ways I think our rabbis have found a way to maybe impose the empathy and acceptance and kindness by just finding a way to say, okay, let's assume that there's doubt, so we'll convert you.
Yeah, yes. And the question is, it is a sort of a, it's a legal ploy. It's a legal fiction. In the same vein, maybe it doesn't quite raise
Right.
the same level of empathy as selling chametz to your non-Jews. So according to Jewish law, it's not only you're not supposed to eat chametz for Passover coming up. In fact, next Wednesday, we're going to talk about Passover. But it's not only you're not supposed to eat chametz, you're not allowed to own it. So now the question is, you've got all this canned goods and all the, there's one thing, it's a loaf of bread, but stuff that is filling your larder, food that you've stored away. And now what are you supposed to do? Just destroy all that food? Would that be economically viable? So the rabbis created a legal fiction that by selling your food to a non-Jew,
you don't own it anymore.
For a period of 8 days or 9 days, you don't own it anymore.
Right.
So the rabbis, there's an expression where there's a rabbinic will, there's a halachic way.
Yes.
And so the rabbis really reformed Judaism, choosing my words very carefully, without saying they are reforming Judaism, but they are very uncomfortable with some elements of Judaism, so they find a legal way to do a workaround. Okay, I want to read one more, or maybe two more, depending on how much discussion we have. So, empathy in times of mourning. Understanding and empathizing with the sufferer's internal experience can strengthen your faith and make you a better friend. This text, focusing on the 3 weeks, a period of mourning in the Jewish calendar, emphasizes the Jewish value of empathy. Job offers a unique window into the interior of the sufferer, not only so that we can face our own difficulties with a measure of faith, but so that we can be better friends to those who suffer. And I suppose if I clicked on this, I would find a lot of discussion, but I really just wanted to read this by commenting something that you may or may not know. But when you go to someone's house during Shiva, and they say the 3 weeks here, so that's the 3 remaining weeks of the month of mourning, the goal is to be empathetic. And the rabbis are actually quite specific about how you do that, which is to say, you don't open any discussion. You enter the room, you approach the mourners, and there's a ritual phrase which is Hamakom yenachem etchem b'toshav le'tzion v'Yerushalayim. May the Holy One console you among all who mourn in Zion and Jerusalem. And then you just sit down and be with them. And you take your lead from that person. The person may want to discuss, the Oscar show. They may want to discuss baseball. They may not want to discuss anything. And your role is just to be there, and the direction is just to be silent. And that's not so easy to do because our culture hates a vacuum of speech when you enter someone's house. But anyway, so I wanted to mention that. This one, go ahead, Alan.
So we know that saving a life supersedes any halakha and any custom, right?
With 3 exceptions.
With the 3 exceptions. This isn't I'm getting to a point. It doesn't relate to that.
Mm-hmm.
But having empathy during a funeral is the situation I'm thinking of where in a typical funeral in an Israeli Orthodox family, the mother can't be with her son during the funeral because it's a worship service, so they have to pray separately. That's a controversy that the reform movement fights against, and in some cases succeeds.
I would say I'm not absolutely sure that's true about a funeral, but I might be.
Absolutely, it's true. There's cemetery stories. I could go on
Yeah,
for
okay.
a long time. But the question has to do, when I think of saving a life, we don't, with the short list of exceptions, it supersedes halakha. So halakha must say that men can't sit next to women. A mother can't sit with her son, even if her husband has died.
Men and women are separated for prayer services. Yes.
Yeah, which would be a funeral or a cemetery.
Or I would say a mourner's minion at someone's house. Definitely.
But only the living people, the dead people, you can be in the same part of you can.
Yeah,
in a cemetery, there are dead people too, but this doesn't apply to them.
No,
actually,
but my question has to do with,
okay, what's your question?
How, I guess I must conclude that empathy for the mourning, MOURNIG, the mourning members, is not a sufficient reason to allow the mothers of their sons to sit together if their husband and father have passed away. I guess
it's yes. So I would say Jewish law is Jewish law. And now the question is, when do you set aside Jewish law? And I would say, during a funeral, and empathy would not be one of those situations. Let's say the mother of the child that died loves ham. You wouldn't give her ham to eat.
No, it's the
there's no reason
during a funeral that I know that Israeli Orthodox rabbis and cemetery practices, they won't allow.
Yes.
They won't allow it, and we fight it, partially succeed, but it's pretty sad, I guess, is what
you
I'm saying.
Fight it? Why?
Oh, the reform movement tries to make.
The reform movement doesn't separate men and women.
No, I'm not talking about a funeral with a reform family. I'm talking about how Iraq goes to court and goes to municipalities to allow families who come to them and say, "Help us, we'd like to be with our family."
Okay.
Women. No, the fighting is a legal. I don't mean.
Yes. So yeah, I'm not familiar with that whole world in Israeli law, and so you have the issue of Jewish law, and then Israeli law, and broadly speaking, in Israel, family law is religious law.
The rabbinate controls these matters for funerals and cemeteries.
Yes.
So because there's some
So what I would say, I'm not familiar with the issue in Israel. I do know people that will go to Orthodox services even though they are not Orthodox. Let's say a family member is Orthodox, or someone dies in your family and they're Orthodox, and they will be outraged and angry that let's say as a woman, she can't sit in the men's section. And if I guess I can sort of understand it, but
I respect the fact that in not in public, but in a private setting of a Orthodox synagogue, that the practices of the halakha make sense, right? If somebody got upset about being there, but an immediate family member, that's the part that frustrates me, of course.
Right. And I don't know where that stands in Israeli law.
Stands where it is. It's still
yeah. So one more thing I want to read, because I love this example, the ethics of empathy. And this Mishnah emphasizes the importance of empathy by prohibiting verbal mistreatment and highlighting how words can deeply harm others. This early 3rd century text from the Mishnah, part of the Oral Torah, underscores the Jewish value of treating others with dignity and respect. And it says, just as there is a prohibition against exploitation, ona'ah, and I would say ona'ah is broader than what we would say the English word exploitation is. It's injury. In bullying and selling, so there is ona'ah in statements, i.e. verbal mistreatment. the Mishnah proceeds this to cite an example of verbal mistreatment. One may not say to a seller, "For how much are you selling this item?" if he does not wish to purchase it. He thereby upsets the seller when the deal fails to materialize. The Mishnah lists other examples. If one is a penitent, one does not say to him, "Remember how rotten the things you did with your earlier deeds." So Dennis Prager used to talk about this shopkeeper rule a lot. And basically what it says is, if you go into a store and you know you're not going to buy anything there or buy a particular item, but you're really curious about the item and you're about how much it costs. In Jewish law, you are not allowed to ask the price of the item. And the best example of that is a camera store. You know you can get better deals on cameras by going to,
47th Street.
47th Street camera store or eBay or whatever. But cameras are so confusing and puzzling that you don't know which camera you should really get. So you go to a camera store and you say, I'm interested in buying a camera, but I really don't know what kind of camera I should get. Can you give me some advice here? And of course, that would include the price. And so what the Mishnah is talking about here is there's two things. You're raising the expectation of the salesperson that he might have a sale. And I would say the other element is there may be 2 or 3 other people waiting to actually buy cameras at that store. And he will lose those sales while he's taking care of you when you know you're not going to buy the camera there.
Yes.
If you don't speak to an actual human being, you just look at the prices on the shelves. Is that okay?
Yes. They're talking about mistreatment of the seller here. So and then, in the discussion of this with that I've been part of, another maybe more pertinent example is, a guy is leading a woman on where she is hoping to establish a long-term relationship. He knows he is not going to have a long-term relationship, maybe because he's married to somebody else, or maybe he's just not in the market. But he misleads her into thinking she might have such a sale, if I can use the word. And I would say, for me, the solution is honesty. You could go into that camera store and say, "Look, I know that I can get cameras cheaper at 47th Street, Photo or eBay, but I don't know what I need." If you disclose that, the salesperson might say, "Well, I wish I could help you, but I have other customers I need to take care of." Or the salesperson might say, "Listen, let me tell you why, even though it might be a little bit more expensive to buy a camera here, because we offer training and we have a discount on what used to be called developing and classes and things, you might still be better off buying your camera here." I would say that's honest. I would say disclosure solves this problem, at least in my opinion. But I would say this is a part of Jewish law, and as Reform Jews, it's ethical Jewish law, so it's something we really should be cognizant of. And when I go into a store, an art store, an antique store, or whatever, I am very conscious of this. And sometimes I will say, I'm really curious about the price of this, but under Jewish law, I know I can't ask you for the price. And then that'll usually lead to a great discussion about Judaism and what is Jewish law, and which may be my really ulterior motive in the first place.
But you've taken up more of their time if you just asked what the price was.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Although there it's voluntary on their part, whereas I'm not misleading them. So the issue really is empathy and not misleading the person. So let's see. Anyway, so I just wanted to cover that, and that brings us to about 8 o'clock. So I will thank you again for coming.
Thank you very much. It was
And
really-
Thank you.
I think I'm gonna next time, since it's just for Passover, I think we're gonna go through an online Haggadah or PowerPoint. I've prepared PowerPoint Haggadahs in the past, and just look at some elements of it. And I'd like to talk about some spiritual lessons that are clearly beneath the surface in what we all sit through as a Passover Seder. And that also gives me excuse to inject some of my silly songs
Oh, no.
as
That's
part of
great.
it.
I love those songs.
Okay, good. I often say
They're
I get
very
lots of requests
creative.
about my songs, but I do them anyway.
They're very
Um,
creative.
Yes.
Yeah,
Thank
they're
you.
great. I like them
Thank
a
you.
lot.
Yeah.
And I do have some that are fairly new.
When
Anyway,
you
so
when you
that'll
Come
be
Monday is a
Monday. We have a class for continuing with Ecclesiastes,
okay, great.
and one of the things I'm looking at, I'll just mention it to maybe more convince myself to do it. I'm leading a book discussion on a book called Kabbalah: A Love Story by Rabbi Larry Kushner. I don't know if any of you have ever read that book. Any of you?
Long time ago. I should reread it if you're.
Oh man, you should. I'm leading a book group, I think next week here in Leisure Village on it. The problem is I can't see how to do it in less than 10 hours. But what I thought I would do, and it might be fun, would be just to have an open-ended discussion of this book, maybe on Monday nights, maybe on Wednesday nights, I don't know. And yeah, go ahead, Lois.
Yeah, when you're done with this,
Oh, okay. So that's something I'm thinking of doing. It is so deep and so amazing, but I have to say I had to read it, Jerry, like 6 times before I finally got it. And I have to say I haven't read it in years, probably 10 or 15 years. I reread it
Yes.
recently. And the fact that I've been studying Kabbalah since the other times I read this helps me get a lot more that he was putting into that book that I never realized was there.
Wow.
And it's
Okay.
very readable, and it's an interesting story on its own. You don't need, most books on Kabbalah are really hard to
Yes.
get anything out of. This one is not.
Yeah, it was an easy read, but I think I would have to reread it.
Yeah, and I'll send out when I do it. I have like 4 pages of discussion questions that I somehow found on the internet, which I can't find now, but I can certainly scan them and send them. Lois, you wanted to say something?
I want to go back to Passover for a minute. What I'm struggling with, and maybe I could get some advice next week. So 2 years ago, besides the regular Haggadah, I talked about the October 7th and the war.
Mhm.
And then last year, I talked about the hostages, and I had people who wanted to write a name of a hostage on their
Mhm.
hand. And I don't even know where to start for what we're going through, which may be over, who knows, 2 weeks from today. It is Pesach, first Seder.
Mhm.
I just don't know what I'm going to do to make it relevant.
It's also April Fool's Day. Maybe we could talk about that, but I don't see
Oh,
how.
yeah. No, it's I empathize with you.
I think we should all
I
just sing your songs, and I think we
No,
need
what I
to
would say is, I mean,
speak.
my instinct, but it doesn't apply to everyone, and it might leave people unhappy, is just to acknowledge, the elephant in the room and
Yeah,
acknowledge that we're doing this at a very difficult time. And a lot of people aren't free and people are dying. And yet nevertheless we keep doing it. So to what extent, I certainly can remember seeing Haggadot for the last 2 years, which incorporated the names of the hostages. And, in many places in Israel and in other places, they would set a table with, several hundred seats, all empty
Right,
as
right.
a reminder. And maybe, you just leave an empty seat for that. But what do you do in a time of war where people are suffering? I think you acknowledge the suffering. Maybe you have an extra dose of horseradish. I don't have any brilliant insights.
Well,
Um,
it's something to think about between now and next week because I'm thinking about it. And it's also who the crowd is. If it were Alan and me and all our what I called brainiacs a couple of
mhm,
days ago who are reading this stuff every night, he and I are debriefing what had happened and what stupid things people said and what smart things people said. But I got a crowd half are not Jewish, but they come every year to my
Mhm.
Seder. They understand the Seder. They don't probably understand anything about the war or care. And my Jewish family have mixed feelings. You know, they're Americans and who
Right,
are
right,
against the war.
right. So
Anybody
therefore,
connected to
I
this?
mean, my instinct would be to acknowledge it and then move on. The purpose here is to connect with the rituals of Passover. And I always, one of the ways I cop out about discussing politics, you've probably heard me say this, is my political judgment is perfect. I am never right. So I am the last person you want to have discussing politics, and it's true.
It would seem that
Uh,
if you're never right, that would be very useful because then we could figure out what was right by process of elimination.
yes, but I think that
Like,
would miss the point of my cop out.
I guess-
Jerry,
who to vote for and then vote for the opposite candidate, that kind of thing.
Jerry, you have your hand up. I don't know if you wanted
Yes,
to.
I just have a request for you to print out your, so we can have your permission to maybe use
Yeah,
a
I
few of them.
will. I will try and I'll try and put together a package. Yeah, Ellen.
Yay.
I mean,
Thank you.
I think the Haggadah or the Passover story uh, gives room. I mean, I'm talking to you, Lois, a little bit. It gives room to understand that um, even the enemy deserves to be
Yes,
pathetic about the Egyptians during the
right.
cross.
This
And so
reducing the wine in the cup and
that part.
the
And so
midrash about
you have to have an introductory sentence or two. Is your question? I don't know what. I'm not giving you the answer actually, but there's an opportunity to do that. That's not political in a way that would drive people crazy. Of course, they will. You can't keep them from going down a political path, but the principle is there without politics.
I mean, you certainly can say that the plague of the destruction of the firstborn, all the plagues on Egypt, we reduce the wine in our cup, and we're reducing our happiness, even though, the Egyptians were horrible to us and they oppressed us and the army was drowned. We still realize, I mean, it's a great coda for the discussion of empathy. We still realize that they were people, and it's sad that their suffering is part of this, and we acknowledge that. It doesn't say that we're wrong. The Nazis were people too. Were we supposed to be kind to the Nazis? But we recognize they were mothers and fathers and sons and daughters.
Well, I'll tell you what I've been thinking about so far, and then, enough. We'll talk about it next week. Two different themes. One is, the heart of a stranger, because I think that's really relevant
Mhm.
for what's happened in this country and ICE and all of that. But also this idea, if someone comes to kill you, get up earlier in the morning
Right,
and kill them,
right.
which
If someone comes
is
to murder you, kill them before they can murder you.
right. And that's like the flip side for me of how you can get into a war like this that hurts people, but you're protecting yourself.
Right.
And
It,
maybe that works for
It-
Israelis and doesn't work for Americans.
well,
I'm
it
not
works in Jewish law. Then, of course, the issue switches to, did we really need to do this? Were they really coming to
right.
kill
And
us? Which is a political issue.
nobody in my crew, they're not going to go. My daughter could do that, Aria, but we're not going to do that.
Right.
That I'm just trying to get the broad way to make it relevant. And then
Yeah, there is something called, there are two kinds of war in Jewish law. You can look this up. I think we've had
Okay.
classes on this. In Hebrew, they're called milchemet rishut, a permitted war, and milchemet mitzvah, a commanded war. The problem that the rabbis faced is King David, conducted all kinds of wars which were just conquering other people, and they can't say that David was sinning in these wars. So they said that there are permitted wars; those are wars of conquest. But you have to obey a lot of rules, namely, you can't fight on the Sabbath, you can't force people who are afraid to fight. There's all kinds of laws in
I
the
thought
Torah
that
about, hold on, let me finish, about fighting. And if you have a milchemet reshut, those laws apply. if you are fighting a defensive war, that war is commanded. It's called the Milchemet Mitzvah. And then you set aside all those laws, which maybe that's what you were going to mention, Stephen, because this is a commanded war and you're protecting your life. So that's how Jewish tradition deals with that. And of course, all the wars that Israel will fight, they would say are commanded wars. That we don't fight wars because we want to conquer Lebanon and keep Lebanon, or when they conquered the entire Sinai Peninsula of Egypt, because they wanted to keep the Sinai Peninsula. So that's the principle. If someone's going to come to murder you, you kill them first, because murder is a sin. Killing is not a sin if it's in defense.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. See you.
David.
Good.
Not only in terms of you saying it wasn't a sin with King David, I thought that was the whole reason that he didn't get to build the temple, was that he
was a person of war.
Too much gold.
Right, but the rabbis weren't going to say that the wars that he fought were sinful. It's just he wasn't a man of peace, so he couldn't build the temple. That's at least my understanding of it. Okay, good night,
But
all.
it's still David Melech Yisrael all these centuries later.
Never mind. How about murder and adultery, which is my favorite stories of David.
But he's still
with Bathsheba. Yes,
I mean, it's amazing that he's a
Melech
Israel.
Yeah. No, the most
and
astounding
little
thing
kids who don't know other kings of Israel, they know King David.
that we still love King David is one of the most astounding.
A lot of them
things.
only know one prime minister. They didn't think there were any other ones also.
That's actually an interesting point. Okay.
Yes.
Good night, all.
Good night.
Sei gesund.